We started out with kind of the idea and the philosophy of apologetics, why we even care about this in the first place. Of course, it's a way to reinforce our faith. You cannot argue and reason people into believing and following God. You just cannot do it. Okay, so that's really not what this is about. What this is really designed to be is a reinforcement for those of us who do believe, so that we can see that our faith is not an unreasonable one, is not a blind, gullible type of faith where we believe something that deep down we know isn't really true, but we kind of go with it anyway because we're supposed to. That's what our parents did, and to be respectable, we believe it, etc., etc. We know that what we believe is truly genuine, that it's grounded and based in factual information, and that because of that factual information, we know that the faith part of our belief is also valid, right? We know that we can confirm the parts that we can confirm, or that should be confirmed, and so that gives credibility to the parts that we cannot confirm. Can you prove heaven? No, none of us have been there. Can you prove that salvation is real? No. But we can prove that God, throughout the ages, has kept His word, that He's always kept His promises in the past, that, and more foundationally, which is what we're studying here, that He created the world that we're in. If He created the world that we're in, and we've seen that He's kept His word throughout the ages, then it's just a simple, small step of faith to say, well, then He's probably keeping His word about things future that we cannot verify yet at this point. That's kind of the perspective I'm coming at with apologetics. We started out with the most basic question that I could think of as far as belief and faith in God, and that is what? Does God even exist? Is He real? Well, how do you go about figuring out if He is real or not? Again, we could go to the Bible and see all kinds of statements and explanations of why He is real. But coming at it from a skeptic's point of view, from maybe an agnostic point of view, they're not going to go to the Bible and see, well, let's see what God says about God. They're just not going to go that way around. And so, is there another way that we can look and see that God is real? Well, the only thing we have left is what? The universe that we live in. Now, those of us who are believers know that God Himself in His Word points back to His creation and says, look around at the creation, the stars and the firmament and life and everything. Everything that I made screams out that I exist and that I'm here. It just demands that conclusion. And so, for those first 2 or 3 weeks, we're doing just that. We're taking Him up on His challenge, looking at I don't want to say the creation, that's biased, isn't it? At the universe in which we live, to see if it really does demand a creator or if it does not. I'm going to try to conclude this today. By the way, we could go on about this for a long time. We don't want to do that. But if we can cover just enough topics to prove our point, to demonstrate that there really is a creator, I think that will suffice. And I'm going to try to finish that up today. We started 2 weeks ago, I think, with the origins of life, right? How does life start and begin? Could it have happened by mistake, or did it have to be designed and implemented and put together by a creator? And I think we pretty much demonstrated that happening on its own is just not realistically feasible. It just can't really happen. Last week, you also looked a little bit at the solar system, the sun, the moon, the stars, the planet, how our specific solar system is absolutely designed to support the life that we now see. It's kind of, I don't know, fun or interesting, or what's the descriptor you'd use, to see the people that are looking for extraterrestrial life, SETI, right? Search for extraterrestrial intelligence, I think is what that stands for. And they have their big telescopes looking for transmissions from the aliens and looking for the spaceships and stuff. And you do see stories of spaceship sightings all over the place, but as far as actual contact, actual communication, you can't find any. And I forget there's a law or a saying about that. Somebody's law, somebody observed that says, if all those aliens are out there, and the idea is that they want to find life desperately, because if life could have evolved out there and we're not alone, then we are not a specific creation, right? Evolution just happens everywhere. It's a bona fide fact. It's kind of cheap and easy. It's a dime a dozen. And so if there are lots of alien civilizations out there, we're just one of many. We evolved just like everybody else did, and now we can get together and talk about our secularism. If we are the only planet in the universe that contains intelligent life, or any life for that matter, then something is very unique about us and our planet. We are somehow special. And if we are somehow special, that just kind of implies a specified purpose by a specified creator. And of course, as we said before, that conclusion is not acceptable. And so we keep looking and looking and looking for the extraterrestrial communication. And over how many decades they've been looking, they just can't quite seem to find it. And so that then demands you ask the question, if they're all out there, where did they go? Where are they? Well, maybe we're too far apart. We just can't hear each other, and their signals haven't had time to get here, et cetera, et cetera. Well, yeah, okay, maybe. But the bottom line is that we can't find them. And so if you're going on best available evidence and being scientific about it, so far all the evidence says what? They are simply not there, right? And that can be a problem for the secularist. But anyway, we're not talking about planets and solar systems today as much. We're going to move on, hit one more topic. Again, the study is not exhaustive by any means. We could do this for a long, long time, but I don't want to put us all to sleep too many weeks in a row with too much fact, because I think we can draw a conclusion from what we have. Last week we ended right here with all the different components of our solar system, and we realized that our planet and our solar system was clearly designed both to accommodate and to protect life, almost like it was designed to be that way in so many different regards. Today we're going to move forward and talk about one last topic. What about evolution? What about the credibility of evolution? Haven't scientists already proven that the Earth is billions of years old and that life has evolved gradually throughout the ages? We have tons of evidence that support that, right? You read about it in the textbooks all the time. Nothing is more important to the evolutionist than fossils. I mean, if you start talking evolution, almost instantly you're going to go to what? The fossil record in the rocks. So let's start there. Let's begin our examination there. I came across a website, as you see I oftentimes do. Again, another secular site. This is not a creation site, explaining how fossils are formed. So before we start looking at the fossils themselves, let's look and see how they are formed. This is from fossilfactsandfinds.com. It's a kind of a scholastic site designed for students that puts it in simple terms, and so we'll use this. Fossil formation, the work of the ages, and it talks about mineralization there and all different kinds of things. Down towards the bottom of the second paragraph, I think I have it highlighted in yellow, says, for species to be preserved, a series of truly fortunate events had to have occurred. If even one of these events failed, then that animal or species would never be seen by modern eyes. In other words, there's specific steps every time a plant or an animal becomes a fossil, specific steps that have to happen. Now, as you know, we have fossils just all over the place, ocean floor, up and all over throughout the rocks, throughout the sedimentary rocks everywhere. In fact, if you have a limestone gravel driveway, probably somewhere in there you have some small fossils, right? Because limestone is that's what limestone is. It's just full of fossils everywhere. You find these things everywhere. It's like every other month you see another article about out in Utah or out in Colorado or something, somebody's digging up a new dinosaur bone. Fossils are all over the place. So, it says, but for these fossils to become fossils, certain things have to happen. The next paragraph, nature recycles. It says, because of this, fossilization is actually a very rare occurrence. It goes against the laws of nature that favor recycling. Just about everything that exists naturally on the planet is designed to be reused and reformed to support some other species or life. In other words, when things die, most things that die don't become fossils, okay? If you drive home today and you see that poor little raccoon laying in the road that's not looking so pretty anymore, and that has come to the end of its being here in this life, and it's laying in a pile on the blacktop, odds are that poor little raccoon will not become a fossil because the conditions are not right for it, right? What's going to happen to it? Well, in a few days, it's going to look uglier and uglier and uglier. Probably you'll see some great big black birds with red heads kind of swooping around, and they'll land on a pile around it. They are eating what's left of it. And then, if the county street department doesn't come up and scoop it and haul it away, what will be left is bones, and those bones will be scattered around. Other scavengers will come and eat it. It'll lay in the grass a while. It'll decay and go away. It will never become a fossil. Okay, it just won't. Because here's what has to happen. Food for thought. Let's narrow it down to animal species for a moment. As an example, this thing says, all animals are designed to be someone else's lunch. all the parts, even before the leftover bones, can be consumed by one species or another, right down to the bacteria that decomposes the sturdiest bones and shells. Things break down. Again, if you've seen the roadkill, you know this happens because it gets really nasty pretty quick. This makes a very bad situation for the formation of fossils. Since every part is designed to be gobbled up, the fossilization process has to happen before someone or something gets a hold of the food. Continuing on, it says, in the first step of fossil formation, an animal or plant must die in the water or near enough to fall in shortly after death. Item number one, it has to die in or near the water. And we're going to get to this in just a minute. But just falling in the water also doesn't cut it, right? That's not enough because that just makes it rot faster. We continue though. The water insulates the remains from the many elements that contribute to decomposition. In the following example, a trilobite, that's a little sea creature that swims around the bottom. I don't think it's coincidental that they picked this one because that's one of the easiest fossils to explain. They don't even explain the more difficult ones. Has died of old age at the bottom of the sea. Bacteria consume the soft body parts, but leave the hard exoskeleton intact. The next one, as time passes, sediments bury the exoskeleton. Step two, it not only has to be in water, it has to be buried. Now it says as time passes. How much time are they talking about? Well, the next sentence kind of gives it away. It says the faster this happens, the more likely fossilization will occur. Land and mudslides definitely help. That's kind of a key thing again. Just because you are in a pond and you die and you sink to the bottom, which by the way, most animals, they don't sink to the bottom, right? They get kind of gross. Have you ever been in a lake and you see those little fishies floating on top and they're kind of laying on their side, not swimming very well? And it's because they're dead, right? That's because they don't automatically sink. They float to the top. If they float to the top, they're not under the water, they're not getting buried, and they're not getting turned into fossils. Something's going to come along, gobble it up, it's going to rot, it's going to stink, it's going to be nasty. It will never be a fossil. So it has to not only die in the water, it has to sink to the bottom where oxygen is less. It also has to be covered up by mud, and it says as time passes, and then it also throws in a little clarifier there, very quickly, right? You can't wait 5,000 years to be buried and then expect to be a fossil because it's long since gone. Continuing on, this further insulates our trilobite from decomposition. You see now why they picked the little sea creature, because it's already in the water, it's already died, and it's already on the bottom just waiting to be buried. So now they say easy peasy. All you got to do is bury the thing in mud very quickly before it rots. Now we have fossil formation in progress. There's another paragraph there talking about how sand and stuff falls down. Pre-mineralization. As the sediments continue to pile on, the lower layers become compacted by the weight of the layers on top. So as the mud layers start to accumulate very quickly, it compresses and squishes out, it compresses and preserves the fossil that's down there, or the animal that's turning into a fossil. Over time, this pressure turns the sediment into rock. Because of the pressure, the mud and the sand and stuff is buried in, turns into rock. That helps preserve things. If mineral-rich water percolates down through the sediments, the fossil formation process has an even better chance of preserving our ancient animal. The minerals stick to it, etc., 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 and it turns into a fossil. And then the bottom one says uplift. As the continental plates move around the earth, crashing into each other, the mountains are formed, former seafloors are lifted up and become dry land. This is exactly what has happened to our trilobite fossil. Why would they put that part in there? That's weird. Well, because all over the dry land we seem to find fossils that are from the sea. Well, that doesn't make sense. What are all these little fish and trilobites and crabs and stuff walk up on the land and decide to die and become a fossil? But if they died on the land anyway, they wouldn't become a fossil in the first place. So they had to have died in the sea. Well, if you have sea creatures up on the land that had to be in the sea when they died, obviously what used to be under the sea had to have come up to land. And that sounds pretty good. But I have another question. We also see fossils on the land of dinosaurs, of land-based plants, of trees, and other land animals, alligators and turtles and stuff like that. So did the land animals swim hundreds of miles out into the sea, tie a rock around themselves to make sure they sunk, and then died so that they could become a fossil? Did those trees walk out into the middle of the ocean and die so they could become fossilized standing up? if we don't understand why the ocean animals are on the land to make fossils, how did the land animals also get in the same fossil column of the ocean animals? Well, that doesn't make sense either. They don't seem to explain that part in the article. But just a thought there. Something is a little bit odd, a little bit off. Now, let's put this in picture form, shall we? Here's a layer of rock or sediment, okay? Over time, another layer is laid down, right? Over millions and millions of years, this occurs. In fact, I looked it up just to see what kind of rates they were talking about. According to the evolutionist sites, they say anywhere from 1 millimeter to 1 centimeter, depending on where you're at, per 1,000 years is how fast these sediments accumulate. So every between, what a millimeter is, it's really tiny, up to a centimeter, roughly half an inch, per 1,000 years. Okay, that's how fast these layers build up. So another 1,000 years, another 1,000 years. Somewhere in the course of time here, throughout these layers, a poor little animal dies. Okay, thousands of years per layer. And something dies. There it is. It's laying there. It's not going anywhere. It's dead. So it lays there, and it lays there, and it lays there. How thick is this fish or turtle or whatever creature it happens to be? Maybe its body is an inch or two thick. Okay, it's a great big bass or a carp or something maybe. Okay. If it's 2 inches thick, and each centimeter, let's go the fastest rate possible, a centimeter per 1,000 years, how many centimeters are in that 2 inches? Roughly 4 to 5, right? So at 1,000 years per centimeter, how long does it take for that fossil to be buried? Several thousand years, right? If it takes several thousand years to be buried by these slow additions of sediments, is the fossil going to become a fossil? No, because you have to bury it really quickly. We just read about that in the last article. So we know that wherever we have fossils, everything there had to have happened very quickly, or else we wouldn't have the fossil in the first place. Everybody with me? Everybody breathe. Really heavy. I think we're kind of phasing out a little bit here. If you were a kindergarten class, I'd have you stand up and do jumping jacks. That'd be fun. No, I won't do that. I would be amused, but you'd probably hate me for life. Okay. Here's your fossil, and it needs to get buried. Another 1,000 years go by, another 1,000 years, another 1,000 years. Finally, after like 4,000 years, this thing is buried, right? And now it's ready to become a fossil. Well, I mean, hypothetically, because it would have been long gone, it would never become a fossil. But we continue on. Then the grass and the flowers grow. Okay. Supposedly, that's how we get them, because we look at the rock layers and say thousands of millions of years, and those thousands of millions of year fossil layers have fossils, but they couldn't have had fossils if it took millions of years to accumulate that slowly. Everybody with me where we're going here? Okay. We already kind of alluded to this also. How do we have land animal fossils? If this all happened in the water, as we saw described in the article, and it had to have happened quickly, where do the land animal fossils come from? The dinosaurs and all that other stuff we dig up. Those are land animals. They couldn't have swum out to the ocean and died because they just, most dying animals don't say, let's swim 300 miles and then die. That's just not how it typically works. Animals that died on the land would never become fossils because they have to be buried in water. So, to have your fossils, it has to be in water. It has to be covered very quickly. It has to be buried by sediment, again, very quickly. And it has to be compressed by weight to turn all that mud into rock and preserve the animal. Okay? So far, so good? Everybody okay? Just a couple more things I'd like to add to this puzzle, because this makes things very confusing. It sounds very difficult for the fossil record that we see to have come to pass. And I'm trying to figure out how this happens evolutionarily. But there's a couple more things to add in here. I found this very well done picture, by the way, from Arizona Geological Survey Institution from the University of Arizona. They had several very nice pictures like this that outline the different strata, the different rock layers that they find in different formations. Different limestones, different shales, and all that kind of stuff, sandstone. There is a bottom, you see that very bottom white line there. It's kind of hard to read. I know the print is small, but I will read it to you. In fact, I'll even highlight that bottom line in pink. It's right here. The very bottom line is what they call the Great Unconformity. If you want to have fun reading about geology, go and Google search the Great Unconformity. on the internet, and you'll find oodles and oodles of articles and different studies on this thing because they can't figure it out. What is the Great Unconformity? Well, here it is. This is again from the University Space Research Association, not a Christian site. The Grand Canyon, the Great Unconformity. It is fitting that the Grand Canyon should contain some of the best exposures of the Great Unconformity. The gap in rock record between Cambrian times and the pre-Cambrian, which is anything earlier. So they look at these layers and they say, whoa, we have a lot of missing rock that should be here that is not. And I read that and I think, wait a minute. So you walk out to the sheer cliff face and there's a great big gaping hole there where there should be some rocks, but there's no rocks there. I mean, I see the picture. It looks like there's rocks there. Why do you look at rocks and say there should be more rocks? What makes you think there's something missing? That was my question. So we continue on. An unconformity is a surface in the rock representing a time from which no rocks are preserved. We know there should be some there, but yet they are not there. It could represent a time when no rocks were formed, or a time when rocks were formed but then later eroded away before the next layer was put down. Okay? The Great Unconformity is important for three reasons. First, it represents a long span of time, 250 to 1,200 million. I don't know why they didn't just put 1.2 billion years worth of rock layers there, based on the slow accumulation of layers that they talk about in the Grand Canyon. So they look at this and they say, whoa, we got up to 1.2 billion years worth of rocks that we know should be here, and yet they're not. And again, it's not like there's an open cavity in the cliff face where they say, hey, there's a rock missing here, where did it go? There's rock layer on rock layer, but they say, we think there should be more, but there is not. Why is there not? Point two, it is found nearly everywhere across the globe. This isn't just a Grand Canyon thing. This Great Unconformity is found all over the world. All over the world, they get to this certain same place in the rock and say, wait a minute, something doesn't line up here. Something is evolutionarily missing from this spot. Point number three, this is our big clue. It divides rocks with familiar fossils, that is the plants and animals and stuff that we know of, from those with no fossils or only fossils of, say, bacteria, little things, but no real fossils below this Great Unconformity. Aha! Now the pieces start to fit together a little bit better. Why do they think there is rock missing? Because we go from no fossils to all kinds of plants and animals. But where's the in-between that we went from bacteria to little softer things, and we don't see the evolutionary progression between nothing and all kinds of stuff that we already see today. Therefore, there has to be what? Something missing. There's the Great Unconformity. That's why they think they see a hole, because they can't trace the evolutionary steps between. Down below is, apparently, from what I've read, igneous rock, which is formed when hot rock cools, right, lava. And up above it is sedimentary, which we talked about, sand and mud and stuff getting squished over the years, and it turns into rock. But it's just one on top of the other. And down below, there's no fossils, and up above, there's all kinds of fossils. And I see here that says, gap in the rock between the Cambrian times and the pre-Cambrian. I'm thinking, Cambrian, that sounds familiar. That's probably sending off light bulbs in your mind too, isn't it? Cambrian. I've heard this before. Oh, yes. Here it is. The Cambrian Explosion. And I think these two phenomena go together. Remember, down below is Precambrian. The first layer up is the Cambrian, where we all of a sudden see all these fossils. For most of the Earth's, this is from pbs.org, in case you wonder. I have all these addresses just to show you where I got my information. It's on the screen there for you. For most of the nearly 4 billion years that life existed on Earth, evolution produced little beyond bacteria, plankton, and multicelled algae. That's down below that Great Unconformity. But beginning about 600 million years ago in the Precambrian, the fossil record speaks of more rapid change. First, there was rise and falls of mysterious creatures in the whatever it is, fauna. Those are plants that happened just before this Great Unconformity. Name for the fossil site where it was found. Some of these animals may have belonged to groups that survive today, but others don't seem to be related to animals at all, that we know at all. So we find some weird stuff we don't recognize, but very simple stuff. This is just below what we'd call the Great Unconformity. And again, to clarify, not every rock layer has this Great Unconformity, but the unconformity is found in various places throughout the world. So it was a global thing, whatever it was, but doesn't affect every square foot of rock. I mean, we do see rock layers below this unconformity, just to be clear about that, okay? And in the places that we do see it, they say we see a lot of rapid change quick with the plants and simpler stuff, but it seemed to have happened very quick because we don't see the slow progression that we would have evolutionarily expected. Then between 570 and 530 million years ago, another burst of diversification occurred with the eventual appearance of the lineages of almost all living animals today. All of a sudden above this rock, which is where we get above the nonconformity, all of a sudden, poof, out of seemingly nowhere, we have all the different kinds of life that we see today, right? All the different species, or what we might even call kinds today, right? Yeah. This stunning and unique evolutionary flowering is termed the Cambrian Explosion, taking the name of the geological age in which time it occurred. But it was not as rapid as an explosion. It happened over 30 million years, which, according to them, is still very, very fast. So we have rock layers, igneous with no fossils, then a line where all of a sudden we have sedimentary rock, which is different, and all of a sudden, poof, we have all the different kinds of fossils of all the life we see today. How could this have happened? I included up here a chart. This is actually from Charles Darwin's On the Origin of the Species, the 1859 version, chapter 4. This is a later diagram of his idea of the tree of life. This is his diagram of how things start simple at the bottom, and you see the branches coming up, and one species turns into another, and then two branch off from it, and they continue to evolve all the way up. But you see a gradual progression from generation to generation of the change within the species and how they slowly change and become new species and differentiate. And this is what, according to evolution, you should expect to see in the fossil record as you go from rock layer to rock layer. There's a problem that pops into my mind which says what? So then why don't we really see that? Because what we just described from the Grand Canyon, from the unconformity, from the explosion, that doesn't sound like a gradual progression to me. So here's what we got. We already said that fossils have to be in water, covered very quickly, buried by sediment, compressed by weight, or we wouldn't even have the fossils. So by all accounts, we should have very, very few fossils anyway, and extremely few land, animal, or plant fossils, because they don't die in the water. But we have them all over the place. But on top of all that, we have huge missing rock layers in the unconformity. We have, and we have an explosion of new fossil types in the Cambrian Explosion, neither of which are called for in evolution, and neither of which can evolutionists really explain away. They try. So I'm thinking about this. As a scientific, objective person, I see the theory, and I see the data and the evidence that's collected, and the two don't seem to match real well to me. So we have an option. Well, we have two options. Option one, the data doesn't fit the theory. Therefore, we have to rationalize the data as to why it doesn't fit the theory so as to keep the theory intact. We have to maintain our conclusion, so we have to reinterpret the data so that it still maintains the conclusion that we want. Option B, we say perhaps our theory is a little wonky, maybe we should reevaluate the theory to fit the data. So which do we do? As a scientist, which do you do? Do you keep the theory of the evolutionary time and reinterpret the data to fit? Or do you look at the data and reevaluate your theory? Obviously, we keep the theory, right? So we have to manipulate the data. But just on the off chance that we decide to question our theory, what kind of scenario could create the situation that we see, geologically speaking? In other words, as these things form, what conditions do these sound like to you? Could I offer an off-the-cuff hypothesis here? May I take a few liberties for just a moment? It almost sounds like a long time ago, there was very little sedimentation upon the earth, almost like there hadn't been any kind of sedimentary things happening, right? Perhaps, to take the religious point of view, perhaps God created the earth, right? And let's say it went along for, say, 650 or so years. Life happened, there's bacteria and things that fall on the ground, possibly are preserved, but nothing really much. but no real fossils are formed because there's no real fossil forming mechanism going on, right? There are no huge floods or anything, catastrophes or anything to form these fossils. Then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, something happens and a massive amount of water starts to come down, not only from the rain up above for a long time, but also, even more significantly, in my humble opinion, are the great fountains of the deep that are perhaps, say, described in the book of Genesis, that open up massive underground reservoirs of water breaking out of the ground, possibly crust layers of ground sinking down into where these reservoirs may have once been, creating ocean floors. Huge amounts of currents being forced out along with minerals and sand and gravel, washing this way and washing that way, creating huge, massive continental and intercontinental layers of sedimentation. Along with these massive washes of current and water and mud, life begins to get choked out because of the catastrophic nature of events that's occurring. And so as these life forms begin to get choked out, which are the first to die? Well, obviously, the least mobile and the most susceptible are going to die. And so the ones that already live on the ocean floor, which are cold-blooded and can't move as fast in the cold, they cannot escape the flows and the currents and the sedimentation, and they're already on the bottom where everything flows down to, those will be the first to be buried. After that, the other cold-blooded animals, which again, if temperatures drop, they cannot move fast enough to escape the deluge and the catastrophes going on, the currents and the sedimentation and everything going on. Those are the next to die, the reptiles, the amphibians, things that tend to live in lower areas anyway where the water would rush to and they would get buried quickly. Not as quick as the clams and the trilobites, but pretty close. I mean, they're not too awful far behind. And as sediment layer upon sediment layer upon sediment layer washes worldwide, all over the place, you see these animals become buried next. After that, the warmer-blooded animals, as the ground disappears, and they begin to struggle and they cannot find a place to live or breathe or eat or have food. They get weak, they also die, and a few of these would also be buried then. Of course, the higher-dwelling land animals and dinosaurs and whatnot, and also would be buried along with the cold-bloodeds. But you see kind of a progression based on their body type, their metabolism, and their location of where they live. So these things are all buried as massive flows of water and sediment and sand and gravel and minerals forced up by these underground caverns exploding onto the scene, awash over all the earth. If that was the case, if that was the scenario, what would you expect to see? You would expect to see a layer with very few fossils, igneous rock. On top of that, you'd start to see a whole bunch of layers of sedimentation, and you might see a progression of basic types of animals, but no transitional species, because there's no transition going on. It's just different types of animals. So a huge array of lower sea-dwelling creatures, then a huge array of land-dwelling reptiles, then a huge array of the upper strata of life, right? You have the birds and some mammals and stuff, and the larger reptiles and dinosaurs. So you see a progression, but no intermediary steps. Make sense? Does that fit the data any better? I'd say that's exactly what the data says. So which theory do we go with, the one that fits or the one that does not? See, as we look at the layers and the fossils, what this screams to me is not slow accumulation of years. It screams to me what? A huge, violent flood covering the earth. I mean, the sedimentation layers that we see aren't just continent-wide, they're intercontinental. You can get off of one continent, North America, for example, and go over to the European continent, and that same layer picks up and continues on, as if almost they had once been one and split apart. But the sedimentation and the flows and the currents cross continent to continent, which may well have been on one continent at the same time anyway, but it's very, very big. A huge violent flood. This is what I see as I look at the information. So again, which theory do you go with? The one that fits or the one that does not? Caveat, one of these has an unacceptable answer because one requires a creator. If one is unacceptable, by default you must go with what? The other one. So let's stick with the other one and go with evolution, shall we? Good idea? Good call? I think so. I think that's the way we'll go on this one. I'm just kidding. I worry about you guys sometimes. So again, the flagship the primary set of data, the fossil record and the rock record, that they claim to support their evolutionary ideas, in my opinion and view and analysis, doesn't even fit their theory at all. I mean, not even close. The formation of the fossils themselves, the organization of the rock, the unconformities and the explosions and the lack of intermediary species and all these kinds of things don't even hold up to the evolutionary idea. Again, this is just fossils. We could go on and on and on, but I'd really like to conclude this part today because we can't spend all quarter on science, although that would be fun. One quick caveat, I got to do this one too. Back to the universe again. I don't know if you heard that they came up with a new space telescope here within the last year. It's called the James Webb Telescope. Several decades ago, they sent up the Hubble telescope, and it was designed to look far out into deep space and look at the stars and galaxies far, far away. And it did so very well, great pictures and great analysis and stuff. Now they've replaced it with a newer version, also the James Webb Telescope, which has even better resolution, better ability to see even farther out into space, which I think is really super neat. Boy, I see those faraway galaxies, and they talk about the other planets and stuff. I think, man, I just need myself a really fancy spaceship to go visit these places. Wouldn't that be super great and fun to stand on other planets, to see all the weird configurations that planets can be in, all the different creativity and variety of the different planets that they seem to describe as being likely based on their scientific telescopic analysis of the planets and stuff, what it's made of. Not only to see the variety, but to appreciate, again, how specialized our planet is as far as supporting life. But I came across an article here that kind of stuck out to me. This is from universemagazine.com, again, another secular site. The title is, James Webb Did Not Refute the Big Bang Theory. I think, well, that's interesting. Why would they even be suggesting that it wouldn't? Whenever they make a statement like that, there has to be something behind the headline that makes them put this out in the first place. And there are tons of articles about this. Again, just Google search James Webb refute Big Bang Theory, something like that, and you'll see oodles and oodles of articles. Everybody's defending as if to say this telescope did not refute the theory. Don't even start thinking that. And that makes me think, well, why would I think that? So I have to read the article now. The network, that would be the internet, is spreading a viral article that the James Webb Telescope has refuted the Big Bang Theory. But the early galaxies in its image, although they look more complicated than expected, still confirm it. The first photos of distant galaxies taken by this telescope made scientists think. Star systems that existed before the universe was even 1 billion years old look bigger and more complex than this theory suggested. In this regard, an article began to spread on social networks that the new telescope refuted the theory that the universe was formed 13.7 billion years ago as a result of the Big Bang. But in fact, scientists do not see any reason to turn the whole picture of the world upside down. Let's catch you up here a little bit. What they did with the telescope was they looked as far away, deep into space as they could, back to a time, because light takes a while to travel. So the further away you look at something, the older the light is, the older it is, the longer ago whatever it is happened. And so you're kind of, they say, looking back in time, right? Almost like getting a letter written from somebody but got lost in the mail, so it doesn't show up to you for 15 years, and then you read the letter, and your information you're getting is old, right? So you're seeing what happened 15 years ago. Same idea with starlight, right? You look at faraway stars, the light is very old because it took a while to get here, and so you're looking back in time, you're getting old data to see what happened way back then. And so the idea is that as you look back far enough, the light will get old enough back to when the universe was formed, and you can see these massive galaxies forming slowly out of clouds of dust, very disorganized, but over the eons, gravity pulls the dust together and it forms stars, and then little pockets out here that spin off, also coalesce and become planets, and then that's how you get the star systems. Star systems come together in groups to form galaxies, and that's how galaxies are formed. And so if you look far enough back, you should see these nebulous, half-formed galaxies as they are just in their formative stages, because you're looking far back enough into the evolutionary process of the galaxies. And so they look back in time expecting to see these nebuluses and clouds of dust, and they see already formed star systems and galaxies. It all started with an article published in Nature magazine where astronomer Alison Kirkpatrick talked about the inconsistencies between observations and theory. What theory? That would be Big Bang Theory. So there's a difference between what we see and what the theory says, and use the following phrase, quote, "Right now I find myself lying awake at 3 in the morning, wondering if everything I've ever done is wrong." After this quote, it is a confirmation that the Big Bang Theory is erroneous, and it goes on to talk about how other people have picked this up and say, whoa, you mean the Big Bang Theory might not be right based on what we see. Careful, though, because now we're modifying the theory to fit the evidence, not the other way around. Skipping on down for time's sake, according to the scientists, the galaxy, should still be formed from separate clouds of gas in which the process is the star formation just beginning. James Webb's observations show already fully structured star systems, albeit small and primitive. Well, I'm not quite sure how they're small and primitive if they're already formed and functioning. They didn't really elaborate on that part. But they go on to say then, from the point of view of the overwhelming majority of scientists, this is by no means proof of the fallacy of the Big Bang Theory. Just because what we see in our evidence through our telescope doesn't confirm the theory and it's not what it calls for, that's no reason to reject the theory. What did we say before? Okay. After all, it has many other confirmations, and it goes on to talk about some other things that we don't have time to go into. But again, just because what we see in the telescope doesn't match the theory is no reason to get rid of the theory, because the alternative is what? Say the word, unacceptable. Yeah. And so instead they create things like dark matter and dark energy, things that we can't see and we can't explain, and we've never seen it. We've never come in contact with it, but it must be there because the universe is expanding and it has to be billions of years old. And to do that, we have to introduce something else to cause it to behave this way. Remember how we created a 5th planet last week to explain how our solar system was? Same thing they do with dark energy and dark matter. It's a mysterious force that we can't see, explain, touch, feel, or test, or observe that has to be there to explain why our universe is the way it is in order to fit our theory. Anyway, there's a whole other area we could spend some more weeks on, but we won't. Whew. Take a deep breath, though. I want to wrap this up. We've covered a couple different areas here, and I want to wrap up this segment of our study. The evolutionary anti-theistic philosophy is very long on hypothesis and theory and suggestion, explanation and supposition. What it completely lacks, however, is observation, information, and genuine evidence. Okay? And we've looked at evidence, and we said before the evidence that we have is the same evidence they have. We see the same rocks, the same fossils, the same stars, the same solar system, same biology. The evidence is the same. The question is, how do we interpret it? Do we let it say what it says, or do we make it fit the theory? We also left ourselves at the beginning of this study a couple weeks ago with these 2 options. There are only 2 options. 1, someone made it, or 2, no one made it. Right? Now we said that if no one made it, then someone could not have made it. However, if someone did make it, then that demands the evidence or the existence of a creator to go